Germany suspends new aid to Rwanda, overgrowing Congo conflict, a call for accountability in Africa's Great Lakes region. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we bring you insightful analysis of the latest news shaping Africa today. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In this video, we dive deep into Germany's decision to suspend new aid to Rwanda over the escalating conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What does this mean for Rwanda, the DRC, and the wider region? Stay tuned as we explore the political, humanitarian, and regional implications of this major development. On March 4, 2025, Germany announced the suspension of new development aid to Rwanda, citing concerns over Rwanda's alleged support for the M23 rebel group in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. The German Development Ministry stated that it was reviewing existing commitments, including a $93.6 million aid package pledged in October 2022 for the period 2022-2024. Germany called on Rwanda to withdraw support for the M23 rebels who have been advancing in eastern Congo and seizing valuable mineral resources. The M23, a Tutsi-led rebel group, has been accused by Congo, UN experts, and Western powers of receiving support from Rwanda. Rwanda denies these allegations, stating that its actions are defensive, aimed at protecting Tutsis from ethnic Hutu-led militias operating in Congo. The Rwandan Foreign Ministry criticized Germany's decision as wrong and counterproductive, suggesting that countries with historical responsibility for regional instability should avoid one-sided measures. This development is part of a broader international response to the escalating conflict in eastern DRC. The European Parliament has urged the European Union to freeze direct budget support to Rwanda unless it severs ties with the M23 rebels and allows humanitarian access to affected areas. Similarly, the United Nations Security Council has condemned the M23's actions and called on Rwanda to cease supporting the group, demanding the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from Congolese territory. The conflict in eastern DRC has deep historical roots, tracing back to the aftermath of Rwanda's 1994 genocide and the struggle for control over the region's rich mineral resources. The M23's resurgence has led to significant civilian casualties and displacement. Recent incidents, such as deadly blasts at a rally held by the M23 in Bukavu, have further exacerbated the humanitarian crisis. The violence has also drawn in neighboring countries, with Ugandan forces entering eastern Congo to combat armed groups, raising concerns about a potential regional conflict reminiscent of the 1990s. Looking ahead, the international community faces critical decisions regarding engagement with Rwanda and efforts to resolve the conflict in eastern DRC. The effectiveness of aid suspensions and diplomatic pressures remains uncertain as Rwanda continues to deny allegations of supporting the M23. A comprehensive approach addressing both the immediate humanitarian needs and the underlying political and historical issues is essential for achieving lasting peace and stability in the region. The conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, remains one of the most intractable crises in Africa, with regional and international actors grappling with the complexities of ethnic divisions, historical grievances, and the scramble for control over mineral resources. The actions of the M23 rebel group and Rwanda's alleged involvement have reignited tensions in a region that has long been a hotbed of conflict since the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Rwanda's position in this conflict is shaped by the deep scars left by the genocide, which saw an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus massacred by extremist Hutus. Rwanda argues that its support for rebel groups in the region, including the M23, is a defensive measure designed to protect its borders from armed Hutu militias, some of whom have taken refuge in eastern Congo. Rwanda's government claims that these militias continue to pose an existential threat to Tutsis within its own borders. However, international observers and governments, including the United States and European Union, have expressed growing concerns about Rwanda's involvement in destabilizing Congo, calling it a violation of Congo's sovereignty. Rwanda's response to the criticism, as outlined in a statement from its foreign ministry, dismisses Germany's suspension of aid as counterproductive and one-sided, urging for a more balanced approach to the crisis. Rwanda insists that the focus should be on eliminating the root causes of instability, including the militia groups that still operate freely in eastern Congo. According to Rwanda's leadership, the M23's resurgence is driven by the militias, not the Rwandan government, which has been accused of fueling instability to secure its interests in the region. Germany's decision to halt new aid to Rwanda is part of a broader trend of international pressure aimed at holding Rwanda accountable for its role in the DRC conflict. This move follows an EU resolution calling for a freeze on direct budget support to Rwanda, contingent on the withdrawal of any military support to the M23 rebels. Germany's actions represent an important step in the Western response to the crisis, signaling that financial support will be contingent on Rwanda's adherence to international norms and peace agreements. However, the effectiveness of such diplomatic measures remains questionable. While Germany's suspension of aid is a significant gesture, it may do little to sway Rwanda's policies, which are driven by national security concerns that are deeply entrenched in the country's political culture. Rwanda's government, led by President Paul Kagame, has maintained a firm stance on its security interests and has largely defied international pressure in the past, citing the country's right to self-defense. Kagame's government has also emphasized the need for more African-led solutions to the conflict, advocating for the African Union, AU, to take a stronger role in mediating peace efforts in Congo and Rwanda's neighboring countries. The involvement of other regional powers, such as Uganda, further complicates the situation. Uganda has been drawn into the conflict due to its strategic interest in the mineral-rich eastern DRC and its long-standing security cooperation with Rwanda. Ugandan forces have been deployed in the region to assist in the fight against the M23 rebels, but this intervention has raised concerns about a broader regional conflict. The potential for further escalation, with countries like Burundi and Tanzania also potentially taking sides, could have devastating consequences for the entire Central African region. Looking ahead, there are few signs that a resolution to the conflict is imminent. The M23 group has captured significant territory in eastern DRC, including areas rich in mineral deposits, making it a formidable force. With the group's growing control over key resources, including coltan, cobalt, and other valuable minerals, there is little incentive for the M23 to lay down arms without substantial political concessions. The presence of these valuable resources has not only fueled the conflict, but has also attracted the interests of multinational companies, which have been accused of profiting from the instability in the region. The path forward requires a comprehensive strategy that addresses both the immediate humanitarian needs of displaced populations and the underlying political and economic dynamics driving the conflict. This strategy should include a robust international peacekeeping presence, backed by the United Nations, as well as a concerted effort to promote dialogue between all parties involved in the conflict. However, such a solution requires Rwanda and Congo to move beyond their historical grievances and adopt a more collaborative approach to regional security. One critical aspect of this process is the role of regional organizations like the African Union, AU. The AU has played an increasingly prominent role in peacekeeping and mediation efforts in Africa, but its effectiveness in the DRC conflict has been limited by a lack of political unity and resources. The African Union's credibility will be tested in the coming months as it seeks to broker peace in the region. For the AU to succeed, it must foster cooperation between Congo and Rwanda while managing the interests of other regional powers like Uganda and Burundi. Additionally, efforts to hold multinational corporations accountable for their role in the conflict should be stepped up. The exploitation of mineral resources in eastern Congo by foreign companies, some of which are accused of sourcing materials from areas controlled by armed groups, exacerbates the conflict. These companies must be pressured to adhere to ethical sourcing standards and to ensure that they are not inadvertently fueling violence in the region. This would be a significant step toward ensuring that Africa's resources benefit the continent's people, rather than fueling further conflict. As the situation continues to evolve, the international community must remain vigilant and responsive to changes on the ground. The suspension of aid by Germany and other Western countries is an important step in holding Rwanda accountable, but it should not be seen as a substitute for broader peace-building efforts. The complexity of the conflict requires a multifaceted approach involving diplomatic pressure, humanitarian assistance, regional cooperation, and efforts to address the root causes of the violence, including the legacy of colonialism, ethnic tensions, and the struggle for control of resources. The coming months will be crucial in determining whether the international community can bring about a lasting peace in eastern Congo and whether Rwanda can reconcile its security interests with the need for regional stability. As the M23 conflict continues to unfold, the world will be watching closely to see whether diplomatic measures like the suspension of aid can make a meaningful difference in one of Africa's most enduring conflicts. As tensions escalate in the Great Lakes region, the situation in eastern DRC also draws attention to the broader political dynamics within Africa. The involvement of Rwanda, Uganda, and other regional actors in the conflict is a clear indication of how intertwined national security concerns are with regional and global political interests. The international community, particularly the West, must acknowledge the complex interplay between security, human rights, and geopolitical influence when addressing the crisis. Rwanda's strategic position in the region makes it a key player in the political landscape of Central Africa. The government's claim of self-defense in the face of Hutu militias is tied to the historical context of the Rwandan genocide, and Rwanda has repeatedly emphasized its security needs. However, critics argue that Rwanda's military involvement in the DRC, particularly its support for armed groups like the M23, complicates the pursuit of regional peace. It also raises questions about the balance between a state's legitimate security concerns and its role in destabilizing neighboring countries. The lack of trust between the governments of Rwanda and the DRC further complicates peace efforts. The Congolese government, led by President Felix Tshisekedi, has long accused Rwanda of supporting rebel groups in the east, including the M23. Despite international calls for dialogue, the two countries have failed to reach a lasting resolution. The Congolese people, who have endured decades of conflict, instability, and exploitation of resources, remain caught in the crossfire of regional power struggles. The role of international organizations, particularly the United Nations, is also critical in the ongoing conflict. The UN peacekeeping mission in Congo, MONUSCO, has been in place for over 2 decades, yet its efforts to bring peace to the region have often been criticized as insufficient and ineffective. MONUSCO, despite its size and mandate, has struggled to protect civilians and prevent the proliferation of armed groups. The mission has faced challenges, including insufficient resources, a lack of political will among the key actors, and challenges related to the complexity of the conflict itself. As Germany and other Western powers take steps to hold Rwanda accountable through aid suspensions, it raises broader questions about the role of international aid in conflict resolution. Aid, especially in the form of development assistance, is often a tool for diplomatic leverage, but it can also be a double-edged sword. While the suspension of aid is a strong message from Germany to Rwanda, it could also have unintended consequences for the Rwandan population, which benefits from foreign aid in the form of healthcare, education, and infrastructure development. This creates a difficult dilemma for policymakers. How can they hold a government accountable while ensuring that the most vulnerable citizens are not further harmed? The situation calls for a more nuanced approach from the international community. Economic pressure, while important, must be coupled with efforts to facilitate peace talks, provide humanitarian assistance, and address the underlying issues of the conflict. A lasting peace in the DRC cannot be achieved solely through sanctions or aid freezes. It requires a long-term commitment to addressing the political and economic factors that have fueled the conflict for decades. A regional approach, led by the African Union, AU, could be a critical factor in moving toward a resolution. The African Union has made strides in addressing regional conflicts, with peacekeeping missions and mediation efforts in places like Sudan and South Sudan. However, its ability to act decisively in the DRC conflict has been hampered by internal divisions and the lack of a unified strategy. For the AU to play a meaningful role in resolving the DRC crisis, it will need to overcome its divisions and take a more active stance in addressing the broader regional dynamics, including Rwanda's involvement. The humanitarian impact of the ongoing conflict remains dire. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes, and thousands have been killed or wounded in the violence. The DRC's eastern region is home to some of the world's most vulnerable populations, who have faced repeated cycles of displacement, malnutrition, and disease. International aid organizations have been struggling to reach those in need due to the security situation, and the ongoing fighting continues to make it difficult for displaced people to find safety. The region has become one of the world's largest displacement crises, with more than 5 million people displaced within Congo itself, and countless others seeking refuge in neighboring countries. Beyond the immediate humanitarian response, there is also the issue of justice and accountability. The legacy of war crimes, ethnic violence, and human rights abuses continue to haunt the region. The International Criminal Court, ICC, has brought a few individuals to trial for crimes committed in the DRC, but many others remain unaccounted for. The ongoing violence and the involvement of armed groups in the conflict, including the M23, highlight the need for accountability at both the local and international levels. Peace in eastern Congo cannot be achieved without addressing the deep-seated issues of impunity and justice for the victims of past atrocities. Looking to the future, the international community must adopt a more comprehensive and collaborative approach to the crisis in eastern DRC. This includes not only diplomatic pressure and aid management, but also a commitment to long-term peace-building efforts. The African Union, in collaboration with the United Nations and other international partners, must take a more proactive role in mediating between Rwanda, the DRC, and other regional actors. Furthermore, the international community must support efforts to strengthen the rule of law, governance, and development in Congo to address the root causes of instability. Ultimately, the resolution of the conflict will require a balance between security concerns and the need for political dialogue. Rwanda and the DRC must find common ground, putting aside historical grievances and focusing on the collective good of the region. This will require bold leadership, political will, and a commitment to peace from all parties involved. Only by addressing the underlying political, ethnic, and economic issues can the region hope to move forward and achieve lasting peace and stability. As the crisis continues, the role of the international community, regional organizations, and civil society will remain pivotal in shaping the future of the Great Lakes region. With no immediate resolution in sight, the need for a comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable peace strategy has never been more urgent. As the situation continues to evolve, it becomes clear that the international community must go beyond traditional diplomatic tools, such as sanctions and aid suspensions. While these measures are important for signaling discontent with Rwanda's involvement in the M23 conflict, they do not offer a long-term solution to the complex and deeply rooted issues driving the instability in the region. The escalation of the conflict and the increasingly polarizing rhetoric from Rwanda and its critics underscore the urgency of finding a lasting resolution. One of the critical elements in addressing the DRC crisis is the management of natural resources, particularly the rich deposits of minerals in the eastern provinces. These resources have long been a source of wealth, but also a key driver of violence, as different armed groups, including the M23, vie for control of mining areas. The involvement of multinational companies, often accused of benefiting from the instability by exploiting these resources, is another layer of complexity that cannot be ignored. The international community must hold these companies accountable, ensuring that they are not indirectly fueling the conflict by sourcing minerals from regions controlled by armed groups. Efforts to address the resource curse in Congo will require a multifaceted approach. This includes supporting efforts to strengthen the governance structures in Congo, particularly in areas related to the regulation of mining and the protection of human rights. The government of Congo must prioritize the development of policies that ensure the equitable distribution of the wealth generated from natural resources, which has long been siphoned off by corrupt elites. International actors, including the European Union, the United States, and the United Nations, must support these efforts through both financial aid and capacity-building programs. A major component of any lasting peace plan for the region must involve addressing the ethnic and political grievances that have fueled the conflict for decades. The deep-rooted distrust between the governments of Rwanda and the DRC must be tackled through direct dialogue, mediated by impartial regional or international actors. The history of the conflict, shaped by Rwanda's intervention in Congo following the 1994 genocide, adds layers of complexity that cannot be overlooked. Both countries must acknowledge the historical injustices that have led to the current situation and work toward a reconciliation process that prioritizes the interests and rights of the people in the affected areas. A key challenge in this process will be to ensure that all parties, including local communities, have a voice in the peace-building process. The government of Congo, Rwanda, and international mediators must engage directly with civil society organizations, especially those representing the affected populations in eastern DRC. The voices of displaced persons, women, children, and marginalized ethnic groups must be prioritized in peace talks, as they are the ones bearing the brunt of the violence. Furthermore, efforts to reintegrate former combatants and combat extremism will be essential for fostering long-term peace in the region. The role of the African Union, AU, remains critical in navigating these complex dynamics. The AU's peace and security architecture has made strides in addressing conflicts across the continent, but it has also faced significant challenges, including a lack of resources and political will among member states. For the AU to play a meaningful role in resolving the DRC crisis, it must take a more proactive stance in addressing the underlying political and security issues. This may involve working more closely with the United Nations and other international partners to ensure that peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts are adequately funded and supported. Additionally, the AU can facilitate a broader regional dialogue that includes not only Rwanda and the DRC, but also Uganda, Burundi, and other countries in the region that have been affected by the conflict. This dialogue should address the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and historical tensions that have fueled the conflict, and focus on building trust among the countries involved. It will also require addressing the concerns of countries like Uganda and Tanzania, who have a vested interest in the stability of the region but may have their own security concerns that could further complicate peace efforts. Looking beyond the immediate crisis, the long-term stability of the Great Lakes region will depend on the success of economic and governance reforms in the DRC and Rwanda. The DRC, as one of the largest countries in Africa, has immense potential to be a driver of regional economic growth, but its ability to harness that potential has been hampered by decades of conflict, corruption, and mismanagement. International partners must support Congo's efforts to build a more inclusive and sustainable economy, focusing on infrastructure development, job creation, and the provision of basic services like education and healthcare. At the same time, Rwanda's economic model, which has been hailed as one of the success stories in Africa, must be part of the broader regional dialogue on development. Rwanda's impressive strides in sectors such as agriculture, tourism, and technology should be used as a blueprint for other countries in the region, including the DRC. However, Rwanda's success should not be seen as an excuse for its actions in the Congo, and the international community must ensure that the pursuit of economic development does not come at the expense of peace and stability in the region. The crisis in the Great Lakes region requires a comprehensive and multifaceted approach that addresses the root causes of conflict while simultaneously providing immediate humanitarian relief. The international community must be prepared to engage in long-term peace-building efforts that prioritize reconciliation, accountability, and regional cooperation. Rwanda, the DRC, and other regional actors must come together to find a path forward, one that respects the sovereignty of all nations involved, acknowledges historical grievances, and works toward lasting peace. With a coordinated approach that includes diplomatic pressure, regional dialogue, and economic support, there is a real possibility for the people of Eastern Congo and the broader region to live in peace and security once more. The next steps in this process will be critical in determining whether this possibility becomes a reality. As the international community looks toward the future of the Great Lakes region, it is essential to remember that the path to lasting peace and stability will require significant sacrifices and a concerted effort from all parties involved. The dynamics of the conflict are shaped not only by political and military considerations, but also by the region's deeply entrenched social, ethnic, and economic divisions. In this context, the importance of inclusivity in the peace process cannot be overstated. Any lasting resolution must involve all stakeholders, including local communities, ethnic groups, civil society organizations, and, crucially, the millions of displaced people whose lives have been uprooted by the violence. A major aspect of any comprehensive peace process will be the issue of justice and accountability. For too long, impunity has allowed both state and non-state actors to perpetrate violence without fear of consequences. The international community must demand that all parties to the conflict, including Rwanda, Congo, and rebel groups like the M23, adhere to international humanitarian law and the principles of justice. This should include not only holding individuals accountable for war crimes and human rights abuses, but also addressing the systemic issues that perpetuate violence in the region, such as the exploitation of natural resources and the absence of effective governance in many parts of Eastern Congo. The United Nations has a critical role to play in this process. Its peacekeeping mission in Congo, MONUSCO, has been on the ground for years, but its ability to protect civilians and prevent further escalation has been limited by both resource constraints and political challenges. For MONUSCO to be more effective, the international community must reassess its mandate and provide it with the resources necessary to carry out its mission. This includes both financial support and logistical assistance, as well as a clear political directive from the Security Council to ensure that all parties are held accountable for violations of international law. At the same time, the African Union, AU, must become more assertive in its role as a mediator in the conflict. The AU has made significant strides in conflict resolution, particularly in countries like Sudan and South Sudan, but its ability to resolve crises in the Great Lakes region has been limited by political divisions and the lack of a coordinated approach to regional security. A more united stance from the AU, supported by the broader international community, could play a pivotal role in facilitating dialogue between Rwanda, the DRC, and other regional players, such as Uganda and Burundi. The key to success lies in fostering trust between these nations and ensuring that they work toward a shared vision of regional peace and prosperity. While the political and security aspects of the crisis are crucial, addressing the humanitarian needs of the population must also be a priority. The ongoing conflict has displaced millions of people, many of whom are living in dire conditions in overcrowded refugee camps or in areas that are difficult to access due to ongoing violence. The provision of humanitarian aid, including food, water, shelter, and medical care, must be scaled up in the short term to mitigate the suffering of those affected by the conflict. At the same time, the international community must invest in longer-term development programs that aim to rebuild communities, restore livelihoods, and create opportunities for people to return to their homes safely. This will require significant financial resources and a long-term commitment to rebuilding the region's infrastructure, which has been severely damaged by the conflict. International donors must work together to support development initiatives in Congo, focusing on rebuilding roads, schools, hospitals, and other essential infrastructure that can help the country recover from decades of war. Additionally, there must be a focus on strengthening governance structures and rule of law, as the absence of effective governance in eastern Congo has allowed armed groups to thrive and perpetuate instability. An important factor to consider in the peace process is the role of women and youth in rebuilding the region. Both groups have been disproportionately affected by the conflict and have often been excluded from peace negotiations. It is essential that women, youth, and other marginalized groups are given a voice in the peace process, as they will be the ones who ultimately shape the future of the region. Their participation is not only a matter of justice, but also a necessity for ensuring that the peace agreement is inclusive and sustainable. Programs that focus on empowering women and youth, including educational opportunities, vocational training, and leadership development, will be crucial for fostering a generation that can contribute to rebuilding the region. Moreover, regional cooperation will be vital in preventing further escalation of the conflict. The political instability in one country can easily spill over into neighboring states, as has been the case with Rwanda's involvement in the DRC. A more coordinated regional approach, led by the African Union and supported by the United Nations and other international actors, could help address security concerns in a way that prevents further destabilization. The integration of countries in the Great Lakes region into broader regional economic and security frameworks will contribute to long-term stability and prosperity. The issue of natural resources, particularly the control of mineral wealth in eastern Congo, also cannot be overlooked. As long as these resources remain a source of wealth for armed groups, the cycle of violence will continue. The international community must support efforts to establish transparent and accountable systems for managing natural resources, ensuring that they benefit the Congolese people rather than fueling conflict. This includes holding multinational corporations accountable for their role in the exploitation of Congo's resources and ensuring that they adhere to ethical sourcing standards that do not contribute to the violence in the region. Looking ahead, the future of the Great Lakes region hinges on the ability of both domestic leaders and the international community to recognize that peace and security cannot be achieved through military means alone. A more sustainable and long-lasting peace will require an approach that addresses the root causes of conflict, including historical grievances, ethnic tensions, economic inequality, and the lack of effective governance. By fostering dialogue, promoting regional cooperation, strengthening democratic institutions, and investing in development, it may be possible to bring lasting peace to the region and create a more stable and prosperous future for the people of Eastern Congo, Rwanda, and the wider Great Lakes region. As we continue to monitor the developments in the Great Lakes region, it is crucial for the international community to stay engaged and remain committed to supporting the peace process. The stakes are high, not just for the countries directly involved in the conflict, but for the broader stability of Africa. The road to peace will undoubtedly be difficult, but with sustained efforts, cooperation, and a focus on inclusivity, there is hope for a peaceful and prosperous future in the Great Lakes region. As the international community contemplates its next steps, the lessons learned from previous conflicts in Africa must be taken into account. The resolution of the Great Lakes crisis cannot be achieved through short-term fixes or superficial peace agreements. The experience of other African countries, such as South Sudan and Central African Republic, illustrates the dangers of neglecting the deep-rooted causes of conflict and failing to implement robust peace-building strategies. While a ceasefire or negotiated settlement may bring temporary relief, sustainable peace can only be achieved if all stakeholders commit to long-term reconciliation, good governance, and economic development. One potential avenue for addressing the structural issues driving the conflict in eastern DRC and Rwanda is through regional integration. The East African Community, EAC, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC, are two regional organizations that could play a key role in fostering cooperation between Rwanda, the DRC, Uganda, and other neighboring countries. The EAC, which Rwanda is a member of, could facilitate greater economic cooperation, help resolve border disputes, and promote cross-border infrastructure projects that would benefit the region as a whole. Similarly, SADC, which includes Angola and Zimbabwe, could play a role in stabilizing the situation in Congo, as both countries have strategic interests in the region. Additionally, the African Union, AU, must take steps to ensure that peace agreements are not only signed, but effectively implemented. The failure of the 2013 peace agreement between the DRC and various armed groups, including the M23, highlights the need for more rigorous monitoring and enforcement mechanisms. The AU can also work to ensure that future peace agreements are inclusive, incorporating all relevant parties, including non-state actors and marginalized communities, in the process of post-conflict reconstruction. The role of the media and civil society in peacebuilding must not be overlooked. In conflict zones where misinformation and propaganda are often used to incite violence, the media can serve as a powerful tool for reconciliation. Media outlets across the region need to foster a narrative of unity, promoting dialogue between ethnic groups and encouraging peaceful coexistence. Civil society organizations, particularly those representing women, youth, and displaced populations, must be actively involved in shaping the peace process. These organizations can help raise awareness about human rights abuse, monitor the implementation of peace agreements, and ensure that the voices of the most vulnerable are heard in post-conflict negotiations. The humanitarian response to the crisis will need to evolve beyond emergency relief. As the region begins to stabilize, humanitarian organizations must shift their focus from short-term relief efforts to longer-term recovery programs. This includes addressing the needs of displaced people, providing mental health support for trauma victims, and ensuring access to education for children who have been out of school due to the conflict. Rebuilding infrastructure in eastern Congo and Rwanda, including health clinics, schools, and roads, will be essential to creating the foundation for future development. These efforts must be coordinated to ensure that resources are used efficiently and that no community is left behind in the recovery process. As for the future of Rwanda's role in the conflict, there are both opportunities and challenges. Rwanda has long positioned itself as a regional power, leveraging its economic success and political stability as a means of exerting influence. However, as Rwanda faces increasing international scrutiny, it must find a way to balance its security concerns with the need for peaceful relations with its neighbors. For Rwanda to regain international trust, it will need to take concrete steps to disengage from supporting armed groups like the M23 and focus on diplomatic efforts aimed at resolving regional tensions. Rwanda's ability to foster regional stability in the aftermath of the conflict in eastern Congo will depend on the extent to which it engages in genuine dialogue with its neighbors and the international community. It will also require a shift away from a military-driven approach to one that emphasizes diplomacy, economic cooperation, and peacebuilding. Rwanda must demonstrate a commitment to being a constructive player in regional peace initiatives, working with the African Union and other international actors to address not only the conflict in Congo, but also broader issues such as cross-border militancy, refugee flows, and economic disparities. The DRC, on the other hand, faces the monumental task of rebuilding its war-torn nation. While the DRC holds vast mineral wealth, it has also been a victim of resource exploitation, which has often fueled conflict rather than benefiting the people. For the DRC to move forward, it will need to establish a clear vision for the equitable distribution of its resources and ensure that its citizens benefit from the country's wealth. This will require substantial reforms to the mining sector, including tackling corruption and improving transparency. The DRC must also invest in its security forces, ensuring they are well-trained, accountable, and capable of protecting civilians while upholding human rights. The DRC government's relationship with armed groups must be addressed comprehensively. While disarming and reintegrating combatants into society is crucial, it is equally important to address the political demands of these groups, particularly those from marginalized ethnic communities. A sustainable peace process must not only focus on security and military issues, but also on addressing the political and social grievances that underlie the conflict. negotiating with armed groups, while controversial, may be necessary to build a broader, more inclusive peace agreement. The international community, led by institutions like the United Nations, the African Union, and the European Union, must support both Rwanda and the DRC in their efforts to rebuild and reconcile. This will require a long-term commitment to peacebuilding, with a focus on both economic and political stability. International actors should also work together to ensure that any future peace agreement is implemented in a way that is inclusive, transparent, and accountable. This means that all parties, including civil society and local communities, must have a seat at the table in negotiations and be involved in the decision-making process. The road to peace in the Great Lakes region is long and fraught with challenges, but it is not without hope. The international community must continue to apply diplomatic pressure while supporting long-term efforts to rebuild and stabilize the region. For Rwanda, the DRC, and the wider Great Lakes region, the path forward will require bold leadership, regional cooperation, and a commitment to addressing both the immediate security threats and the underlying political, economic, and social issues that have fueled the conflict. Only through a sustained, collaborative effort can the region hope to achieve lasting peace and prosperity. As the international community continues to assess its role in the Great Lakes region, it is imperative to consider the broader geopolitical implications of the ongoing conflict. The involvement of global powers, particularly those with strategic interests in Africa's resources, plays a crucial role in shaping the dynamics of the region. The West, led by the United States and European Union, has been vocal in its condemnation of Rwanda's support for the M23 rebels, but their actions have often been inconsistent, particularly when it comes to holding multinational corporations accountable for their role in the exploitation of Congo's mineral resources. Western governments must prioritize transparency in trade and investment practices in Africa, especially in resource-rich regions like Eastern Congo. There is a growing recognition that economic interests, often tied to multinational corporations, have exacerbated conflicts by fueling armed groups' control over lucrative mineral deposits. The mining industry in the DRC has been a magnet for exploitation, with various armed groups profiting from the extraction of minerals like cobalt, coltan, and tin, which are crucial to the global supply chain for electronics, batteries, and other industries. The international community must hold companies accountable for sourcing minerals from conflict zones, ensuring they adhere to responsible sourcing standards, and ensuring that resources benefit the local population rather than fueling further violence. At the same time, it is critical that African nations themselves take a stronger stance on resolving the regional conflict. While the African Union has made some efforts in peacekeeping and conflict resolution, its ability to act decisively remains limited. In order to achieve lasting peace, the AU must strengthen its conflict resolution capacity and demonstrate a unified political will to end the violence in Eastern DRC. This may involve reforming its peace and security architecture to allow for quicker deployment of peacekeeping forces, more effective diplomatic mediation, and a more robust monitoring mechanism to ensure the full implementation of peace agreements. Regional cooperation will also be key to any lasting peace agreement. The interconnections between Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo are profound, with shared histories and intertwined economies. The political and security challenges in one country can easily spill over into neighboring nations. Thus, resolving the conflict requires a multilateral approach that addresses the concerns of all regional stakeholders. While Rwanda's actions in Congo are central to the crisis, Uganda's interests in the region, especially in the mineral-rich Eastern Congo, must also be acknowledged. Uganda has long been involved in the DRC's conflicts, and its military presence in Eastern Congo, particularly in areas controlled by rebel groups, raises questions about its role in the region's future stability. To this end, a regional dialogue that includes Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, and other neighboring states such as Burundi and Tanzania could play a crucial role in fostering cooperation and security. A comprehensive security framework that tackles cross-border militancy, including groups like the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, could help stabilize the region. However, any such framework must also address the root causes of the conflict, such as historical ethnic divisions, political marginalization, and the economic exploitation of the region's resources. Moreover, the issue of displaced people must be given priority in any future peace plan. The conflict in eastern Congo has created one of the largest displacement crises in Africa, with millions of people fleeing their homes to escape violence. Displaced populations, many of whom are living in overcrowded refugee camps or makeshift shelters, face not only the immediate dangers of conflict, but also long-term challenges, including food insecurity, lack of access to health care, and the trauma of displacement. Humanitarian organizations must continue to provide emergency relief while simultaneously working with governments and local communities to find durable solutions for these displaced populations. Rebuilding homes, infrastructure, and communities will be a long-term effort that requires international collaboration and support. As the situation in eastern Congo and Rwanda unfolds, the role of women and youth in peacebuilding must be emphasized. Both groups have been disproportionately affected by the violence and have often been excluded from the peace process. Yet, they hold immense potential to drive change in their communities. Women have been on the front lines of both the conflict and the efforts to rebuild, playing pivotal roles in local peace-building initiatives, trauma recovery, and advocacy for human rights. Their involvement in the peace process is not just a matter of equity. It is a practical necessity for ensuring that peace agreements are not only signed but successfully implemented. The youth, too, represent the future of the region. Many young people in eastern DRC and Rwanda have grown up in the shadow of violence and instability. Yet, they are also a source of hope and energy, eager to contribute to rebuilding their societies. Providing education, vocational training, and opportunities for youth engagement in peace processes will be essential for creating a generation that is committed to peace and reconciliation. Investing in young people's futures can help break the cycle of violence and build a more peaceful and prosperous future for the region. Finally, the role of the international community must extend beyond diplomatic efforts and humanitarian aid. The global community, including both state and non-state actors, has a responsibility to support long-term development in Congo and Rwanda, with a focus on sustainable growth, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights. Sustainable peace is only possible when people have access to opportunities that allow them to build a better life for themselves and their families. Development initiatives should include support for education, healthcare, infrastructure, and job creation, all of which are critical for creating the conditions for lasting peace. The crisis in the Great Lakes region presents an incredibly complex challenge that requires a comprehensive, multifaceted approach. While the suspension of aid by Germany and the growing international pressure on Rwanda are important steps in holding the country accountable, these measures alone will not bring about lasting peace. A more inclusive, regional approach that addresses both the immediate humanitarian needs and the long-term political and economic challenges is necessary. The international community, in collaboration with regional actors, must work together to support peace-building efforts that prioritize justice, reconciliation, and the protection of civilians. Only through sustained, coordinated efforts can the Great Lakes region hope to achieve the peace and stability its people deserve. As the conflict in the Great Lakes region endures, it is essential for African leaders to recognize the long-term impact of the violence not just on their nations, but on the entire continent. The lessons drawn from this ongoing crisis should not be underestimated. The lack of decisive action, weak regional cooperation, and failure to address the underlying political, social, and economic issues have perpetuated instability. For Africa to secure peace and progress, the role of leadership must evolve to become more proactive, accountable, and collaborative. To African leaders, the advice is clear. The path to lasting peace and stability lies in placing the interests of their people above narrow national or personal agendas. This means fostering regional cooperation and addressing grievances in a transparent and inclusive manner. Leaders must set aside past historical grievances and work towards mutual trust and understanding. This requires political courage and a willingness to engage in dialogue with all stakeholders, including civil society, armed groups, and marginalized communities. Rwanda, Congo, Uganda, and all involved countries must focus on the collective security and prosperity of the region. By working together to resolve the M23 issue and other regional challenges, African nations can strengthen the foundation for lasting peace. A commitment to the African Union's vision of continental unity, backed by effective conflict prevention mechanisms, is crucial. The AU must be supported to enhance its capacity to mediate conflicts, with stronger enforcement of peace agreements and greater cooperation between regional organizations. African leaders should also prioritize the protection and empowerment of vulnerable groups, especially women and youth, in conflict resolution and reconstruction processes. These groups are often the first victims of violence, but also possess immense power to drive change in their communities. By including them in decision-making and peacebuilding, leaders will ensure that peace is more sustainable and inclusive. Additionally, African governments must improve governance, fight corruption, and work to ensure that resources are used for the benefit of all citizens. The exploitation of natural resources has fueled much of the conflict in the Great Lakes region. Tackling the corrupt practices in resource management and ensuring that the benefits of these resources are shared equitably will be vital for long-term stability and development. Strengthening the rule of law and ensuring justice for victims of the conflict will also be key to rebuilding trust in government institutions. In summary, the key messages are clear. Lasting peace in the Great Lakes region and across Africa requires inclusive leadership, regional cooperation, accountability, and the protection of vulnerable communities. African leaders must prioritize unity and dialogue over division and conflict. The international community, too, has an essential role to play in supporting peace initiatives, but it is ultimately up to Africa's leaders to chart the course for a stable and prosperous future. For Africa to rise above its conflicts and reach its full potential, leaders must remember that peace is not simply the absence of war, but the creation of conditions where justice, equity, and opportunity prevail. This is the challenge that Africa faces today, and it is a challenge that can be overcome with vision, cooperation, and commitment. The Great Lakes region, and Africa as a whole, stands at a crossroads. With decisive leadership, the continent can move toward a brighter, more peaceful future, where its people can thrive without fear of violence or instability. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. If you find this analysis helpful, don't forget to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts on the situation. Subscribe to The Bold African Voice, BAV, for more comprehensive breakdowns of Africa's most pressing issues. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, we make the difference in understanding Africa's role on the global stage.